Everyone. Welcome to this podcast. Today we have Sandeep from Poseidon Networks joining us today, who's going to share his exciting journey in terms of academic background and most recently in terms of Story Protocol and Poseidon, what exciting things they're doing. Welcome to this podcast, Sandeep.
Oh, great to be here. Thanks for the invite.
Awesome. Sandeep, let's deep dive into your background. And I know it's very interesting, but I would love to have specifically your angle into take where a bit of reflection on how academic background, specifically into this decentralized world, gives a bit of an upper edge or gives a bit of a different, sort of a perspective on that. Yeah.
Yeah. I think my interest in all this started during my PhD at Stanford. So my thesis was on a topic called cloud and swarm robotics. So the idea is, swarms of autonomous vehicles, drones, and they're all gathering petabytes of interesting data. So there's too much to upload over 5G, too much to store in the cloud and train models on. So the idea is if every robot in the world could only send 1% of interesting data per day, how do you intelligently sample that data to maximize accuracy of machine learning models, but minimize your system's costs? So that was my thesis at Stanford, and I took a very hands-on approach. Actually, every day I would record my dash cam in the Silicon Valley, and you'd see really interesting events. Most of the stuff was boring, but you see Waymo testing their cars, and this was probably in 2019, right? So that was like the motivation for this. So I built this Where's Waymo computer vision model. So as I became a professor at UT Austin, I started to think about, okay, this was just one grad student working on cloud robotics, but how do you actually scale this and what are the incentive mechanisms? And that got me into decentralized data collection. What are the crypto economic incentives to do this? How do I value people's data and so forth? So I always had this at the back of my mind. And I started my first PhD students on this topic of crowdsourced learning. Yeah.
Awesome. I think that's a very interesting take on, how in everyday life, generally, I mean, being more curious and just, sort of getting in gives you a much better understanding of, the correlated topic. So
Exactly.
Sandeep, how did you like from the academic, sort of thing, how was your transition or journey into the, decentralized world? What motivated you? What was that factor where you thought, hey, I mean, this is the area that, I want to spend my next time on?
Yeah. Great question. So I always had this at the back of my mind based on my journey in cloud robotics. And what really got really interesting to me was I started learning about stablecoins as a professor at UT Austin. And actually, I looked at a lot of these so-called deepen projects. And I actually did some papers on how to model their crypto economics using what's called mathematical control theory. So just like you regulate a self-driving vehicle or a rocket, the way you actually can design your token economy is to be stable, right? How you burn and mint tokens. So I was always thinking about crypto in the background. But really what actually changed was just pretty recently. About last May, I gave a talk on some of my work on decentralized data collection and how data is the most valuable form of intellectual property for training foundation models at Story Protocol. I was an invited speaker there as a professor. And there we started thinking about, well, everybody is operating on foundation models now. And there are three key battlefields like compute, largely solved by NVIDIA. Then there's model architectures, which the open AIs of the world are quickly commoditizing. Then we started thinking about, okay, data is actually the final frontier. How should we collect that? How should we consider it intellectual property? And how do we value it? So it's always, that was like a natural transition for me into the crypto world and Poseidon.
Awesome. Yeah, I think what Poseidon is doing is like pretty phenomenal in terms of, sort of data collection and how, various sort of, things are like utilized. Like you mentioned, in our last meeting about the audio collection files,
Yeah.
collecting like different dialects and stuff. Could you give like a deep dive into, a couple of like interesting use cases that you have summoned upon or, is Poseidon right now doing in?
Yeah, definitely. So we've been starting from demand first. So we're talking to a lot of the biggest foundation model companies, and they said, look, many data sets are commoditized now, mostly text, right? Because anybody can scrape the web. And that's like the first frontier of foundation models. Where they really need help is curating what's called long tail data or rare unique data sets for the physical world. So robotics, egocentric video, but also audio data. And if you look at all public audio data sets, they're very biased towards Western European languages, right? Whereas actually a lot of these foundation model companies are seeing huge traction in the Indian market. A lot of users on their self-serve platform are using text to speech or transcription services in various parts of India. So foundation models don't do well for, say, Southeast Asian, Indian, Eastern European languages. So our idea was let's crowdsource this data in a crypto economic fashion. So just in 2 weeks, we gathered about 35,000 hours of data. And that's more than many public data sets and more diverse. So what we're doing now is to say, okay, how do we actually prove our data is valuable to the AI community? So we're actually building what are called evaluation benchmarks showing that look, our data is quite diverse. So if anybody and challenging. So if anybody was to take an off-the-shelf model and run it on the Poseidon data set, it would actually be a very hard benchmark to do well on. And I'm leading an effort to fine-tune models and show that, okay, by virtue of having orders of magnitude more, say, Hindi or Marathi language data, we can actually improve foundation models.
Very interesting. And Sandeep, you mentioned few on this, sort of like language, sort of models that are being
Mhm.
created. But on the supply side, I think it's fairly pretty enough because yeah, people will sort of contribute data. But you also share some light on how the end use cases, or you mentioned few of these guys are using for text to sort of different sort of models, and any exciting like a real world example where you see, hey, you know what, this data was being utilized and they were able to
Mhm.
manage XYZ thing.
Yeah. So where we are is we are in like late stage discussions with some foundation model companies. I can't name them, but I can tell you in general the type of use cases, right? One is called transcription. So speech to text, right? So that will do fairly well, but once you have nuanced characters and punctuation and so forth for say Bengali or for Hindi, and it won't do well. The other kind of thing that's kind of greenfield is text to speech, right? So creating high quality synthetic audio. And what becomes interesting there is how do I actually even evaluate that synthetic audio is good? So if I want to say, okay, I want, a lot of people are actually using this in customer service. So they might say, okay, I want a female voice that would be used in a banking application in Japan and would be very polite and use honorifics, right? Now, how do I actually gather that training data? But also, if I generate that audio, how do I say that, okay, this is the nearest neighbor in the real data set? That's the closest example, and they are concordant. So there are a lot of evaluation problems out there that we're trying to tackle as well.
Got it. Sandeep, you also mentioned in one of the last conversations about Poseidon's sort of data being utilized for robotics or say autonomous vehicles in
Mhm.
coming in.
Yeah.
Can you also share a bit on those exciting sort of use cases?
Yeah, definitely. So just to kind of back up here, audio was just a reference implementation for us. It's just a proof of concept that yes, we can quickly collect valuable data. And moreover, that data is not just junk or deepfakes. It's actually real audio, and you can fine tune state of the art models on it. But if we zoom out, Poseidon fundamentally wants to be a training data platform. Or you can think of it almost like the Amazon of trading data. So if you log into Amazon today, you can find any product under the sun. Just click checkout, right? So imagine we have different suppliers that are geo distributed. They can be call centers, very large, like warehouses. They have video, audio, or the combination thereof, which is called multimodal, or even LiDAR and radar. So we have a data set zoo, and we're actually building out this so-called supply portal. And then on the other side, let's say I'm a foundation model company. I should be able to look through and search this zoo in natural language, just like you do in Amazon. And then you just click license, right? That's the ultimate goal. So we're also talking to some robotics companies. Typically, what they want is called multimodal data. So it'd be, let's say both of us were in the same room. I might have a GoPro looking at you, and vice versa. There might be overhead cameras. And as I kind of make mannerisms and so forth, there would be motion tracking of where my joints are. So if I want to train a humanoid robot to talk like me and you, but also operate like us, then you need the video and the audio jointly.
Makes sense. Sandeep, in the last few months, also like a lot of exciting updates on Poseidon were pushed out. I think one standout
Hmm.
was the mobile app where people
Yeah.
were contributing sort of data. So, what's your take on it? I mean, there are different data sources where at the collection point, it could be through some B2B medium, or it could be
Hmm.
more of a retail focus, like what you guys are doing with the
Yeah.
application. So, say in the next upcoming quarters, what do you feel Poseidon's approach is in terms of collecting data, and where do you see a crazy set of standards being set as a part to the other, sort of data collection companies?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So we don't want to be purely an app, right? That was just a test case. We are forging a lot of B2B supply, um, like kind of contracts right now. So they're very interesting things. For example, we are talking to companies like, if you know Thumbtack in the US, companies like that, but in Southeast Asia, but where people are maybe, it's a services kind of thing. Let's say they come to your home, clean your home, or they clean your car and so forth. They will have a GoPro and they might get extra dollars for actually videotaping themselves doing these tasks, right? So a bunch of suppliers in audio and video and the combination thereof were onboarding and so forth. But really where we want to differentiate ourselves compared to other projects is so-called AI legitimacy. So our number one goal is to get someone who's Web 2, they could be Web 3 agnostic, to license this data and to prove to them that our data is good. I am leading an internal effort to actually fine tune and train models. And we plan to like publish some academic papers in the next couple of months on that.
Awesome. Just a bit of thing, Sandeep, like when the initial Poseidon journey started, right? When you guys, had
Yeah.
this thing in mind that, hey, we will, try to contemplate or, move towards that journey. And
Hmm.
obviously in this fast-pacing world, a lot of ideas, reshape,
Yeah.
change, depending on a lot of regulatory and other sort of mediums. Like, how was that journey, right from the conceptualizing to initial implementation to say this app launch or the new exciting things that you guys are doing? And this is from the context of startup founders, who are in that early stages where they say they have like, some sort of couple of ideas to implement, but they're not sure how well it will shape up or what sort of traction, they will get in. So, if you could answer from that lens, I think, yeah, that would be great.
Okay, great. Yeah. So I would like to say that we've only just started in June or officially July. So it's still been very early. We're still figuring out a lot of things. But what's kind of interesting here is you should definitely talk to customers first. So we've talked to a lot of foundation model companies, and you should be open to your assumptions being totally invalid or challenged, right? So going into this in my academic hat as a professor, I thought, okay, text data is boring. Everybody has text data. Therefore, we should look at video and audio. But actually, maybe that wasn't correct. We talked to many potential customers who said generic text data, like books or what I can scrape from the internet, is well known. But now, if I have complex legal documents or code bases or engineering schematics, they're actually valuable, right? So some of your assumptions will be wrong, and you should be flexible to change that based on what the market and customers tell you. The other part about this is maybe even contrary to what the common like YC dogma is. So YC has this thing like, don't expect you should build it and they will come, like customers will come. You should talk to a bunch of customers. But at the early stages, it's a delicate dance, I believe, where if you talk to customers, they say, okay, you don't have anything, show me something. So you have to build a little bit based on conviction. So our idea was to say, look, in a couple customer calls, people brought up audio, but of course, we didn't have any data. Therefore, we should launch this very large campaign and show some initial results. And now that we actually have quantitative numbers that our data set is very high quality and large, we see more inbound. So it's that delicate dance between, building something based on conviction and also talking to customers, I think is valuable. Yeah.
Makes sense, yeah. I think speaking with customers and then getting the feedback on, what sort of variable things that they will be using is always sort of a great, push or help, because it helps in redefining what is the best offering. And then I think the
Exactly.
entire efforts can be pushed onto it rather than spending time into, some unknown areas where you feel, hey, I've just wasted 3 months or 4 months of time
Exactly.
into it.
Exactly. The other kind of thing that I'm kind of pushing at Poseidon is to think about, so many crypto projects do decentralization for the sake of decentralization. But at the start, you should be very careful about what you decentralize because it's a lot of overhead and a lot of like infra to build, right? It wastes valuable cycles. So when we first thought about this data collection app, we said, of course, the collection part needs to be decentralized. But storage, processing, doing quality control, running AI models and fine tuning them, we shouldn't boil the ocean. We should make all that centralized at the beginning. And then, I can also talk about the subnets, about how we're kind of first internally dog fooding or testing our own ideas and cleaning our data and validating audio like fidelity. And only then we're saying, okay, we should launch to the broader public. We have a light paper on subnets and so forth, but that will come later.
Awesome. I mean,
Yeah.
really excited to see, this crazy, things that are
Yeah.
being shipped out. Yeah,
Hmm.
that's
Hmm. Yeah.
Sandeep, one more aspect on it. I know Poseidon is like, funded by A16Z,
Hmm.
but typically for early stage founders, what would be your fundraising advice, just on a surface level, what
Hmm.
sort of things that they should prepare on? And in terms of clarity, right? Because a lot of times what happens is VCs or some, like investors demand for, some sort of traction.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
at the early stage, it's like really hard to do it, because you
Hmm.
need to have all those sort of inputs and stuff. But
Yeah.
specifically for, say, AI companies like Poseidon and, that are building in this Web3 world, what would
Hmm.
be your 2 cents advice on, like follow this 3 step or, follow this couple of
Hmm.
points where you feel you're prepared and, then you can like possibly move ahead with.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's a great question. So I'll start from like just a regular AI raise. Some VC once told me, and it kind of resonated with me, that as a founder, you should have some unique insight about a customer pain that only you know and others should might not know, right? So it's kind of like a lot of due diligence, cold customer calls, and understanding a pain point is super valuable compared to just the tech. Okay, that's key. The other is, I think, clearly articulating the problem, how it might grow, the market might grow, and why things are under addressed today in a clean slide deck. So I think many of the pitch decks I see are too verbose. They hone in on random technical details, but people really want to see the problem and the narrative and why it's actually compelling, right? Now on the crypto and AI thing, I'm somewhat like an outsider. I'm mostly like a AI person. That being said, I think a lot of these generic advices on like how to structure a pitch deck and so forth are valuable. I think for crypto meets AI, I think what people want, at least investors, I think, is some comparables and how you're different from existing projects, right? So like the ones that are doing quite well might be news research or say BitTensor and so forth. So you kind of want to talk about what your unique value proposition to compared to them is. And what I found interesting is actually thinking about where value comes from and also where demand for your network comes from, because a lot of people in crypto just build projects that aren't really used, right? So I think it's valuable to disambiguate, will a web 2 company, a foundation model company, actually use this and provide you revenue, or is the intended customer a web 3 audience? I think being clear about where your revenue sources will come from is also very valuable.
Makes sense. Uh, on on the other aspect of it, Sandeep, I was just speaking to few
Hmm.
academic, folks who are in that advanced level PhD guys,
Hmm.
and it's often, sort of a it's a different scenario, because if you're coming from an academic background, you focus on one core thing, which is a very deep, sort of
Hmm.
things.
Hmm.
But I mean, they were like really excited that, hey, I mean, this problem could be solved, but
Hmm.
they wanted on, few team members or the others to tackle on the other GTM strategies or something
Hmm.
around that.
Hmm.
So, given your background and given you come from, a bit of an academic thing, what would be
Hmm.
your advice to such founders, or, like vulnerable founders who are into currently right now in the academic space? They
Hmm.
have in some problems, that they think, this might be a better one, but, specifically in terms of team assembly or something, how should they plan on starting this one?
Oh, that's a great question. So I'll unpack that. I would say I'm still early in my entrepreneurial journey as a professor, so I still have a lot to learn. But the crux of it is actually what I realized in academia is, especially as faculty, we're encouraged to be super broad. This algorithm applies to all domains from bio to energy and so forth. But in startups, it's the actual opposite. You need to be quite narrow at the beginning. You need to know your ICP, like who's going to buy this, what their pain point is, and often too broad solutions don't help anybody, right? They're kind of like not so at the very beginning. So it's actually being more specific about actual customer journeys is something I learned in the startup space. Okay. Now, more broadly, I think academics should play to their forte, but also pair with business people. What I mean by that is academics, especially professors, we're always pitching to get some sort of funding, right? We have generally pretty clean slide decks or used to public speaking. So those are certain things that academic founders can actually have a natural advantage to do and potentially raise money. I think the harder part for academics is to stop talking in broad generalities, but to focus on things that are typically abstracted away in academia. Like, how does the customer actually get data? What is their day to day workflow? Like, what is the ROI? Like, what is the most simple product I can provide and will it integrate into their workflow? These are things we don't think about much. So, my advice to academic founders is to get into the nitty gritty details, talk to your customers a lot, and try to actually do some cold email and roll up your sleeves to do stuff that we don't do in academia. Also partner with business folks, but like almost people have to switch roles. Like the business folks need to know a little bit about technology, but the academics need to understand how to sell on their own. Yeah.
Now, let me flip the question, Sandeep, because
Hmm.
it's
Yeah.
a lot of the other founders, from, let's say non, academic guys,
Hmm.
often when they go on, and if say, particularly in a Web3, if they're working on some of the core technologies where they feel, like say a ZK or a Prover or, sort of other, deep dive, oftentimes, a lot of the feedback is you need to have like bit of strong academic, folks into the team and stuff.
Hmm.
So the question is like specifically for people where there is obviously some tech, involvement over here. Uh,
Hmm.
what are pro points of having like academic, like from people from academic background in your team? How
Hmm.
can that boost in, and how should majority of them look at having some or the other association with these guys?
Oh, yeah, yeah. So you can think of it like there are two classes of academics you could have. Some who are professors like me. So the value is actually technical writing, sometimes evangelism, like getting on these podcasts, talking about your brand, and also like writing pitch decks and so forth, as well as leading research, right? Which I'm doing at Poseidon as a chief scientist. The other types of academics are generally people who just finished their PhD. So they're very narrow, but super the world class experts. They'll know more than me as a professor. And one benefit of having such people on your team is that they're actually okay with uncertainty. So, for example, my own PhD students, they started a startup on generative AI for time series. We were talking about that. They're doing quite well. But what my first PhD student, who's the CEO, keeps telling me is like, look, Sandeep, my PhD journey was full of uncertainty. I had to navigate things on my own. There wasn't a clear goal that necessarily you gave me as an advisor. I had to figure it out for myself. That's super similar to the startup because And he actually made an interesting analogy. He said, as a professor, you have 10 PhD students. So you're kind of like a VC. You throw some ideas, some of them won't work, some of them will. So, and then it's kind of like for him now, it's like, okay, this is a bet that somebody made on me, but I have to make it work, right?
Awesome. Thanks, Sandeep. I think this definitely will be, a lot of useful for
Hmm.
startups, who are looking to have like academic folks on the team. And
Yeah.
generally, I've seen, yeah, a deeper reasoning, sort of thing really helps
Hmm.
in this. Obviously, your GTM, obviously your other, sort of non-tech things really works in, but having like a deep, profound, sort of thing really gives that sort of an edge. And
Exactly. Hmm.
startup teams should leverage that. Yeah. Coming back on Poseidon, Sandeep, I think
Hmm.
this year has been like, sort of crazy regulatory, sort of
Hmm.
things, happening around.
Yeah.
We recently, I think just a couple of days back, surfaced on that, probably ChatGPT is gonna, distance from health and legal related,
Hmm.
sort of things.
Hmm.
As a startup founder, that's building in this AI or Web3 AI space,
Hmm.
like how do you foresee this entire stuff, and what sort of planning do you actually do, like for example with Poseidon, if say any crazy law comes up which restricts you
Hmm.
guys on doing some sort of thing, so how do you plan for it, and what sort of general steps would you
Yeah,
advise?
that's a great question. So what we're trying to do is be more like a system and platform to match supply and demand for training data and not tying ourselves into one particular use case or even modality, right? So this Amazon kind of thing is interesting because okay, we're not just creating legal data or medical data, right? It's like video, audio for diverse use cases. But in general, I feel for us, because we're not doing safety critical kind of applications with AI, I think the regulation still hasn't been on our horizon so much. So yeah, that being said, I think there might be questions about where you're curating this data, um, whether so we're being pretty careful about licensing and data rights for different countries and so forth. So yeah.
Got it. Couple of last questions, Sandeep. I know we are
Sure.
a bit extending over time,
No
but
worries. No worries.
it's a fantastic, to hear all your
Hmm.
ideas. So, in terms of next couple of quarters, 25 is almost about to end.
Hmm.
What are the grand plans for Poseidon in the early next year? Yeah,
Yeah. Hopefully, we'll be able to sign and announce some foundation model companies as customers. That's the fundamental goal. The second is to actually, like I said, open source some of our data as a research like starter pack and build a developer community and actually potentially even we're in-house training some models to show the utility of our data and create these evaluation benchmarks. We want to open source part of that to the public. Yeah,
got it.
exactly.
And
We're
one
definitely
last question.
interested. Oh, sorry. We're definitely interested in the Indian market. So I know you were talking about different suppliers in your network, but we will be hosting some data collection programs very likely in India and creating custom models for the Indian market. So if anybody's listening to this, like pay attention to those and they might be of interest.
Awesome. Sandeep, as we deep down, one last question. What would be a
Mhm.
couple of ideas that you feel can, sort of like game changing, specifically from the early stage founders perspective?
Mhm.
Can you, throw around a couple of ideas that you feel on top of the mind can really make a greater impact?
Oh, do you mean like new business ideas outside of Poseidon, for example? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
I, at least for me, fundamentally, where some of my research is going and where I'm interested is this whole concept of neurosymbolic AI. The general idea is okay, deep learning has done quite well, but foundation models, they don't have logical reasoning, they don't understand the laws of physics. So, some research in my lab is how do I use a pre trained foundation model, but then make it pair it with some logical reasoning or laws of physics so that it becomes requires less data to train, lesser compute for inference, or it just becomes higher performant and more adaptable. So we're doing this for video search. I think that's like a really ripe problem. It's a more like AI only kind of thing or idea. The other kind of ideas I have, it's actually what my students are building for their startup Synthify, is generative AI for time series data. So most foundation models are video, audio, and text. We naturally understand those modalities. But the bulk of enterprise data, energy, networking, medicine, is all a continuous signal. So their startup Synthify is handling that. I believe we haven't looked at the crypto markets yet, but I believe there are all these on-chain signals, and SEC filings, text, Twitter. If you can combine those and do better market insights on time series, I think there's a lot of decentralized finance applications that can get unlocked.
Awesome. Thanks, Sandeep, for spending time and sharing your thoughts, ideas on range of topics. And I'm pretty sure this would be a lot of helpful out there to young founders who are listening in, and definitely will see some impact created.
Perfect.
And Yeah, great, sort of support for Poseidon, and wishing forward the best of year going forward.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Pratik. It was great talking to you again and being on the show.
Awesome.
Perfect.